Hello and welcome to the Ask Abhijit show. I hope you are all doing very well. I hope you're doing fantastic. Welcome to the 136th episode of the Ask Abhijit show. So, before we get into the questions, which are going to be from the live chat today, let us see who all is there with us. And I'm sure lots of interesting things are happening worldwide that we could talk about. So, let us see who all is there. I can see Suraj, Knowledge with Anadi, Vivek, Tanay, Rita, Adesh, Darshan, Aviroop, Haripriya, Kapil, Khadwal, Abhi, Ved, Tanay, Soumya, Guwahati, Ayush, Death Note, Madhav, Manu, Darshan, Mr. India, Divya, LE06, Ranjan Kumar, Shubham, Tathagat, Imon, Tushar, Sena, Nilesh, Alpha, Durga, Mo, Pinky Kumari, Kiran, Priyanshi, Ritik, Dungar Singh Chauhan, Rizul, Harsh, Ankan, Goblet Fire, Abhijit Chanakya, Ajay, Pooja Maurya, Praful, Vaibhav, Nitesh, Vikrant, Hakuna Matata, Pankaj, Ilyas, Manoj, Rahul, Aditya, and Lage Raho Online, Goblet Fire, Vanshika, and a whole lot of other people sharing Bhutia, Vladimir Adityanath, Muskan, Harsh, Aditya, and a lot of people. Thank you all for being on the show with us, and let us get into the questions. So, what questions do we have for today? What questions do we have? Let us see what questions we have. Let's see. Start asking your questions, and I'll pick as many as I can. So, I think we should start where we should start. Smart Money asks, is Xi Jinping really under house arrest? Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's happening in China. There are these rumors swirling around on social media, mostly on social media, some on YouTube, etc. Rumors about Xi Jinping having disappeared. He is no longer visible. There was some big meeting or convention or something in which he uh, did not appear, but he gave a pre-recorded message that somebody else read out for him. That sort of thing. The situation in Beijing is weird. All the flights are being cancelled. Thousands of flights have been cancelled. Let's take a look at what the situation in Beijing is like. Flightradar24.com. Let's see that. One second. Let me put that on the screen. And let's see what Beijing looks like right now. What's happening in Beijing? Here we are. Here we are. Come on. All right. This is Flight Radar 24. Let's go into China, which is east of India. Beijing is the northeast of China. So where is Beijing? Beijing. Check it out. Beijing is typically the busiest airport in China. And if you look here, there's nothing happening. There's nothing happening in Beijing. Where are the planes? Where are the aircraft? Very few flights around Beijing, and the entire airspace seems to have been cleared out, which is extremely strange. I hear that thousands of trains have been cancelled. Yes, there are definitely planes going around, taking off and coming down in other parts of China, but Beijing suspiciously very clear. So there is clearly some sort of abnormal situation in China, and it appears that Mr. Xi Jinping rushed back to China, to Beijing, from the SCO summit where he participated in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, I think, where Mr. Modi was there, Mr. Putin was there, and various other leaders of the SCO were there. So Mr. Xi Jinping rushed back to China apparently, and after that he has not been seen. That's what one hears, and there is no official confirmation or denial from the various Chinese news outlets, media outlets, from their various officials. Nothing. They are quiet about this, tight-lipped, and there is no actual proof as of today that something has happened. Maybe a coup has happened, but there is nothing that proves that a coup hasn't happened either. So we are kind of in limbo. We don't have confirmation either for or against a coup. Now I have spoken about this various times in the past year or so on this channel, that a coup is always on the cards when it comes to China. China is a one party dictatorship, right? And there's no democracy within the Communist Party and in China. It's typically the strongest and most powerful leader who makes his way to the top. Typically, it's a he. Yeah, it's never been a she. It's It's the most brutal, the most cutthroat leader who makes his way to the top. And the leader will continue as long as he or she, as long as he typically serves the agenda of the Chinese Communist Party, of enriching the party and taking the nation forward in the right direction which they want, and so on. And they obviously would not want a leader to become too powerful. Yeah. And there is a hierarchy in the Chinese Communist Party, a power structure. The core leadership is called the Politburo of the Chinese Communist Party, of the CCP, which is a small number of very powerful individuals, the most powerful individuals in China. And out of that group, that core group, one leader is typically chosen. It's not an election, it's a selection. And Mr. Xi Jinping has been around for 10 years now. Typically, a leader is chosen for 5 years. Now he's been around for 10 years, and this by the end of this year, maybe in October, he was supposed to be reselected for another 5 year term, right? So um, he obviously has lots of enemies within the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese political system is a one party system. It's extremely competitive. It's a dog eat dog world. You rise to the top, you're going to make thousands of enemies. Mr. Xi Jinping has left lots of political opponents in his wake. Many of them have been imprisoned for corruption or whatever, and so on. He's made lots of enemies, but as long as he has the control of the reins of power, he is untouchable. But there will be sections in the Chinese Communist Party who resent what he has done, and who will be envious of his position and who would seek to replace him. And that's a constant power struggle that goes on in any organization, whether it's dictatorial or democratic or whatever. We see this everywhere, but in China, it's especially accentuated. So, what is the deal? Well, as of today, as of right now, what is the date today? Today is the what is the date? Today is the 24th of September 2022. As of today, we don't know what the situation is. The situation seems to be very ambiguous. We don't know. Yeah, it looks like there could be something going on. I just showed you what's happening in Beijing. All the flights have been cancelled. That is extremely weird. Beijing is the one of the busiest airports in the entire world. And look at this. It's like crickets. Nothing happening here, which is extremely unusual. I cannot remember the last time something like this happened in Beijing. And not only the airport, thousands of trains have been cancelled, especially in the Beijing area and all that. So clearly something unusual happening. Now we don't know what it is. It's not. I mean, in the past, the Chinese have shut down the country at various points in time, and various cities like Shanghai, for instance, and even Beijing and other places, because of the COVID outbreak, right? The COVID pandemic, and because they have this very strict no COVID policy, they would typically shut down a city or an entire province for a month, 2 months, who knows how long. And so during the past 2 years, various such things have happened, but this doesn't look like it's COVID that's appeared suddenly out of nowhere overnight. That doesn't make sense. So clearly something is happening, and Mr. Xi Jinping has not been seen in public since the SCO summit, since he rushed back home after the SCO summit. So what are the possibilities? What could have gone? What could have happened? First, maybe there's a coup. Second, maybe there's some new virus that's come out and everybody is scampering for cover. Third, maybe he's unwell. That's also a possibility. Mr. Xi Jinping isn't the healthiest person. Even when he was first appointed as the leader of China 10 years ago, he disappeared for a month or two to take care of some health issues. Yeah. So yeah, if you look at him, he's not the slimmest person. He's kind of overweight, and he may have health issues. He's not the youngest person either. He's most likely in his late 60s, early 70s, somewhere around there. Most likely late 60s. Yeah. So there could be possibly several reasons why Mr. Xi Jinping has disappeared. But if he has health issues, that doesn't account for the closure of the airspace around Beijing. Yeah, and some media outlets are saying that maybe the Chinese military is conducting some exercises, and that's why they have closed down the airspace. Well, doesn't quite add up. Yeah, and if they are really closing down the airspace for military purposes, then it's alarm bells all around China. If the Chinese are closing down significant portions of the airspace for whatever they're doing. So yeah, as of today, we don't know what's happening, but clearly something strange is happening in China. And let's see what happens. We'll have to keep an eye on this. Tomorrow I will revisit this topic again, hopefully with some new information, which will hopefully give us some clarity. But that's where we are right now. I have a couple of videos on this channel, one or two by myself, about why a coup is always on the cards in China. Look it up, search it on my channel. A coup is always on the cards in China. And there's another video from the podcast between with me and Dr. Edward Luttwak, who's one of the great geostrategists alive today. So in that video, he explains how a coup would happen possibly against Mr. Xi Jinping. So if you're interested, do check out those videos. All right, let's see what else we have. What else do we have? Xi Jinping house arrest. That's what I'm talking about, my dear friends. That's what I'm talking about. I just spoke about it now. Um, Rishi says, why do you think Zelensky from Ukraine backed India's permanent UNSC membership bid, even when India didn't condemn Russia? I'm not aware of what Mr. Zelensky had said or not said, but you know what we are talking about here? We're talking about a statement. What is a statement? It's words. Words make no difference. People, Indians are so enamored with words. He said this, he has supported us, he has supported nothing. A statement is like a feather in the wind. The wind will blow and the feather will disappear. You'll never see it again. Statements and words are ephemeral, they mean nothing. If Zelensky truly wants to back India's claim, then he should lobby support with his bosses in the United States, right, and other nations. A statement makes no difference. It changes nothing in the world. I can make 50 statements today, and 3 months from now, nobody will remember that. Yeah, and politicians, they make statements all the time. They make statements on the record, and then they contradict themselves a week later, and they don't care about that. Yeah. So these statements mean nothing. The only thing that matters is actual actions, and we see no actions about this. You see the Americans saying from time to time that they support India's bid for whatever permanent UNSC membership. Have they done a single thing about that? Have they taken a single step in that direction about opening up the possibility for India's membership, permanent membership in the UNSC? No, they've done nothing. Words, words, words. Please stop being enamored with words. Words mean nothing. Words are the currency of the politicians, and in geopolitics you can say anything you want, but at the end of the day, what you do, what your actions are, that's the only thing that matters. And so this is pointless. It is irrelevant in the geopolitical context. All right. Vanos says, why didn't the British colonize Nepal whereas they managed to capture the entire subcontinent of India? Was there any specific reason for that? The British even launched an expedition into Tibet, in which they kind of brought Tibet to a certain extent under their not exactly control, but they imposed certain conditions, trade conditions, etc., on Tibet, and they opened up Tibet to future exploration by them in the context of the great game that was being played geopolitically between the British Empire, the Russians, the Turks, and so on and so forth, for control of Central Asia. Yeah. Uh, so why didn't the British colonize Nepal? The Nepalese were only in name not colonized. Of course, the British did not see. First of all, Nepal, as you know, is a mountainous, hilly region. There is a Tarai region in the south, and then there's the mountainous, hilly region in the north, and that's where Kathmandu is ensconced. Right, Kathmandu, the capital city. There's not much of value that sits in Nepal. Nepal isn't a resource rich region. It doesn't produce much. Yeah. Nepal has always been an extension of the Indian subcontinent. It's part of the Indian subcontinent. It's always been part of various Indian empires and kingdoms. Yeah. And there's nothing much specifically that grows there. So the British decided to use Nepal as a buffer state between British India and Tibet, where there were these Chinese claims. The Chinese were claiming, the Chinese were interfering in Tibet, and there was a possibility of confrontation of some kind between the British Raj and the Chinese Empire from time to time. So they wanted to keep a region as a buffer state, and they chose Nepal for that. And yet, you see that the Nepalese were greatly dependent on the British for a variety of things. For instance, the entire practice of sending uh, Gurkha soldiers to the British army began during this period. Yeah, even today, various uh, Gurkha soldiers still serve in the British armed forces, and they're not treated quite well, right? They don't get the kind of same pensions as the British guys get and all that. So, and yet it's a step forward for them. It's an opportunity for a good future. So the British. And if you recall the incident in Jallianwala Bagh, uh, the soldiers who fired at the innocent people, men, women, children in Jallianwala Bagh, half of them were either Balochi or Pashtun, and half of them were Gurkhas, right? So that tells you the whole story. I mean, that tells you a significant amount that you need to understand. That Nepal may technically not have been under British rule. The British may not have had a political agent in Nepal. The British may not have collected taxes from Nepal. And yet, Nepal was essentially entirely at the mercy of the British Raj. If the Nepalese monarchy did not, you know, fall in line with all the demands of the British, then they would have been annexed anytime. The British were in a position to annex Nepal anytime they wanted, but they did not choose to do that. They chose not to do that in order to not get embroiled in any situation or scenario with China when China was making claims to Tibet and there was all this thing happening. So that's what they wanted to do, and that's why it was not officially annexed or colonized. Right. What other questions do we have? Uh, what do you think of Iranian women burning burqas? Well, it's entirely up to the Iranian ladies what they want to do, and the people of Iran. I think the people should have a choice in whatever they want to do. Whether they want to wear something, they don't want to wear something. I think it's their business. It's their internal matter. We should not get excited about anything that's happening there. It's not our business. The entire geopolitical thing is, world affairs and international affairs is predicated on the principle of non-interference. So as long as Iran doesn't interfere in India's internal matters, we should not interfere in their matters. Whatever is happening there is for them to decide. The people and the government. If there is a clash between the people and the government, well, one will come out on top, and that's how it goes. At the end of the day, it's about power and control. So, what do I think of the Iranian women doing this? Well, it is their choice, and let the people of Iran decide what they want in the long run. That's what I would say. All right. YouTube account says, has communism ever been implemented in the exact way of Karl Marx? How could that society be like? Well, if you look at what Karl Marx wrote, he wrote voluminous volumes. One is what is it called? The Communist Manifesto. The second one is Das Kapital, right? Das Kapital is a massively enormous book. I don't think anybody reads that, but it's there. So the thicker the book you write, the more eminent you become. And now he's considered to be a philosopher. So what kind of communism did he envisage? Karl Marx envisaged that a bourgeois capitalist society should be destroyed via a communist revolution, right? A revolution led by the proletariat, which is the working classes. So he wanted the workers to unite and overthrow the rulers, the capitalists and the bourgeois, means those who benefit from capitalism. And so he wanted a communist revolution in any bourgeois and capitalist society. After that, he did not say anything about what kind of society should exist after the so-called revolution supposedly succeeds. So here's the problem with Marxism. When you advocate a revolution, you are advocating violence. You're advocating mobs and rampages on the streets by the workers, right? You're advocating violence, a violent overthrow of the existing government. That's what you're advocating. Now, Karl Marx did not specify what sort of leadership this revolution should have. What kind of people should be the leaders of such a communist revolution? Yeah. He did not say whether such leaders should be elected, they should be appointed, or just some thugs should get together and the biggest thug should rule. Typically, in a violent revolution, it's the most violent elements of society that come together and come to the top as the leaders. The more brutal and more violent you are, the higher you rise in a violent society. That's how it works. So when you advocate a revolution that is a violent overthrow of the government, you're typically going to have the most brutal and most violent people rising to the top, the most ruthless people. And that's what you see all the time in any communist society. In the past, you've seen that, right? So Mr. Karl Marx did not specify what sort of leadership he wanted to lead the communist revolution, the revolution of the proletariat. And then he said that he wanted the post revolution society to be a dictatorship of the proletariat, which means a core government that will rule the entire country on behalf of the workers. Now, who will elect this government and its leaders? Will it be a democratic election, or will the tough and violent and brutal guys who led the revolution, will they lead this as the dictators? So he did not specify any of these things, and that's where there is so much ambiguity, and that's why there are so many problems with communism, because it's always the most brutal people who rise to the top. Look at the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, they did succeed in evicting the Kuomintang and defeating the Japanese and taking over the country. But look at the incredible brutality the Chinese Communist Party perpetrated on the people of China in the 20th century. Close to 100 million people must have died in the various excesses that they perpetrated. The Great Leap Forward, the I don't know what all they did, right? I don't remember exactly, but the biggest culprit was Mao Zedong. Crazy guy, absolutely crazy guy, but he is revered and loved by many Chinese even today. And they say that what he did was right. He cleansed the society of the bad elements. Yeah, well, 100 million people, that's how bad your society was. I don't know what the number is. Some say 40 million, some say 80 million, some say 100 million. Whatever it is, even a million is incredibly ridiculous. And you see the same thing in other places. Look at the USSR. Look at the Stalinist brutality in the USSR. Look at what he did in Novorossiya in Ukraine, the Holodomor, the deliberate starvation of the people, and all the other things that happened in Stalinist Russia. Millions of people died during that phase as well. And even later, the system was extremely oppressive, wasn't it? Right? Uh, collective forced collectivization, no right to property, and the KGB was everywhere, eyes and ears everywhere. You do not know who was your friend, who was your enemy. Even your family could be somebody who could have there who could betray you. You saw the same thing in East Germany, the Stasi, yes, the secret police that would spy upon the people, and so on and so forth. So that's the problem with communism. Karl Marx did not specify clearly what sort of society he wanted in the post-revolution era when the communists take power. He specified nothing, and that's why it's always been this way, right? He was not clear about what he was uh, prescribing for society, and that's the biggest problem he created. He called for a revolution, he called for violence, he called for these overthrows. He said he wants the dictatorship of the proletariat, and he created this wonderful pseudo intellectual framework with these fantastic words like proletariat and bourgeoisie and lumpen elements and the lumpen proletariat. It sounds so intellectual, it sounds so intelligent. When you absorb Karl Marx's terminology and you start giving speeches with that, people think that you got everything figured out, you understand everything. And it's typically the most brutal people who are drawn to the communist ideology because it serves them. And 99% of people who espouse communism are the cannon fodder, the people on the streets. They will benefit not at all from it. It's only a very small percentage of the population that ends up benefiting the most. They end up hoarding 100% of the power and 100% of the wealth of the entire nation, and they rule as a dictatorship of the proletariat. That is the problem with communism. So that's why because so communism has never been implemented in the exact way of Karl Marx because he did not specify any exact way at all. That's the problem with him. Yug says, how do we stop drain of brain? Well, you need to make the country better. You need to have a better education system. You need to have meritocracy in the nation. See, the problem is that there is no meritocracy in India. In government jobs, you have all the reservations. In the education system, in universities, in colleges, you have these massive amounts of reservations, and there is so much corruption. There is so much misgovernance. The roads are bad. The traffic is always congested. Cities, whenever it rains, they go underwater from time to time, especially even large cities, and there are so many problems. If you have a society that is structured in this manner, where all the institutions are still colonial in nature, where the institutions do not serve carry out the functions that they are supposed to carry out, when you have a nation that is built like this, then people are going to try and leave for better prospects. They may love the nation and the culture and the civilization, but they will go out of the country for the sake of themselves, their a better life, and for the sake of the children. And that's why Indians have been leaving India for generations, typically to English speaking nations, typically the US or the UK. Nowadays, even to Australia, some Indians are going to other countries as well, maybe in Europe or whatever. So that is the cause of brain drain, right? So you need to restructure the country, reform all the various institutions in the country, the education system. You need to make India a completely meritocratic country. Everybody should get enough opportunities, multiple opportunities. Once you take a job, you should not have the job for life. You should have multiple options. You should be able to change careers whatever time you want. Yeah. So you need to offer people multiple opportunities, and you need to offer people the possibility to rise to the highest of their potential. Any nation that offers this is going to be very attractive, not only to its own citizens but to outsiders as well. And typically, for the longest time, it's been the US that has offered this. The US is a fully capitalist nation. There are people in the US who have to struggle to even put food on the table. They do two jobs, three jobs in a day. They sleep 4 hours, 5 hours a day, and even after working so much, they are able to only barely put food on the table for their families. Right? It's the people who don't have any skills in education. But if you are educated, if you have skills, then the sky is the limit for you in the US. So typically, Indians who go there are very highly educated, and that's why anybody who acquires a master's level education, university level education, wants to immigrate to the US because of all this. Because in the US, as long as you keep your culture, you know you subdue your culture, don't show any pride in your culture, and as long as you assimilate and you work hard, you can rise very high. And you see all kinds of various American companies have Indian CEOs. A whole bunch of major American corporations have Indian CEOs, right? So and you have many companies in Silicon Valley that have been founded by Indians and so on, Indian origin people. So you give people the opportunity to rise to the fullest of their potential, they will find that attractive. So India needs to do that. India needs to find ways of do that. There are so many issues in India. Transportation is bad, the infrastructure is bad, the roads are bad, there is no rule of law and order. And some people get upset when I say there's no rule of law. Go outside your house and stand in the street. Do you see anybody following traffic rules? Do you see any government official enforcing traffic rules? There you go, there is no rule of law. Yeah. So there are all these issues. You fix the issues, India will again become attractive for not only Indians, but even for outsiders. You rise to a certain level of greatness, people will stop leaving. So how do you stop brain drain? By making India great again. It's a cliched phrase, but that's the deal. India always has been the greatest civilization, the most prosperous civilization. You go back on track with that, everybody's going to come back. Even those who have left India 10, 20 years ago for better prospects in other nations, they will be highly tempted to come back. And you give enough opportunities, everybody will come back. So that's what needs to happen, right? That's what needs to happen. All right. Some what other questions? What did people eat during the Ramayana era? Well, we don't have any textual evidence of what people used to eat. We do have some stories from the Ramayana that Lord Rama was eating those berries, bear, that lady offered him shabari, and so on. So we don't have any actual evidence of what people used to eat or not eat. Yes, India is a massive, massive, massive place. It's an enormous subcontinent sized region. In case you're not aware, let me show you. Yeah, look at the maps. Here's the map. Where's the map? Come on, map. Here we are. See how large India is. Enormous. I mean, we Indians are used to seeing this thing and it looks very small, but you can fit France and Germany and Spain and the UK, and I'm sure a little bit more inside the Indian subcontinent and still have room to spare. It's enormous. So what did people eat? People would have eaten different kinds of diets in different parts of India, right? So when you talk about Ayodhya, it was part of the Kosala Mahajanapada, and then you have Lanka, which is down south, and so on. So I would imagine that in different parts of the subcontinent, people would have eaten different kinds of food. What do we have any idea for sure what they used to eat? I am not sure, because there is no textual evidence or record left today, surviving today, that maybe provides maybe a cookbook from that time. What recipes did Indians have? We don't have any of that, so we can only speculate, right? But I would imagine Indians of that time would have eaten pretty much what Indians eat today, apart from all the foreign influences that have crept in. Yes. So that's what I could say. That's what I would be able to tell you. Now let's see if do we have other questions that are more interesting. Aha. Now World War Three. Listen, it's fun to think of wars, but it's not fun. Wars are terrible. Um, Wars are never good. Wars sometimes are necessary for nations to in order to achieve justice or whatever they seek. But the ones who suffer in wars are always the innocent men, women, and children, the innocent citizens. So we should not be very excited about this prospect. Now, is World War Three on the in the offing? Is it on the cards? World War Three, I hope, is not on the cards. What could set off World War Three? A World War Three kind of situation is typically when you have a complete bifurcation of the global system, and you have one massive power, one major power that is trying to replace another major power. That's typically the China US paradigm. The US is still enormously more powerful than China. Their military industrial complex, it dwarfs anything China has. Right, the Chinese are trying to rise. They are trying to rise, but they are still no match for the US. They can't even take back Taiwan as of 2022. Maybe in the next 5 to 7 years, they may possibly feel that they are right. They are there and they can do it at that time. But right now, they are not even in a position to take back Taiwan. So, so right now, I still don't see World War Three happening anytime in the immediate future. There is the Ukraine conflagration that's happening. Yeah, the Ukraine war is happening. I don't know what's happening. You have all kinds of reports coming in. It's in the Western media. It's typically that Russia is losing, Ukraine is winning. That's what they've been saying since February. Well, let's keep an eye on that. I typically uh, see the situation on a month to month basis, because day to day, if you look at it, you will get misled by what the propaganda that's flowing around tells you. So you have the Ukraine war, the Ukraine conflict. The West is not getting involved directly. They are using proxies. They are sending arms and ammunition to Ukraine to fight the Russians. So it's essentially that war is between Russia and the West, especially essentially Russia and the US, with the Ukrainians fighting on behalf of the Americans, and the Americans will fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. So that war is going. It looks like it's going to go on, unless there is a ceasefire and something like that, which will happen only when Russia has achieved whatever objectives it wanted to achieve. So the Russians will not stop until that those objectives are achieved. So you have the Ukraine flashpoint, and apart from that, there is no other hot war happening. And as long as nobody makes any silly moves, World War Three will most likely not happen. We have to understand what the red lines are. What are China's red lines? What are Russia's red lines? What are America's red lines? What are India's red lines? And so on. Once you understand that, you can understand what can trigger a war. So, what are China's red lines? I think too much of US encroachment in various uh, parts, territorial regions that the Chinese see as their own, especially Taiwan. If there are too many provocations vis-a-vis Taiwan, there could be something happening there. Uh, Japan and China also have a dispute. There are problems there. So there are many flashpoints, geopolitical flashpoints across the world, which we can see on the map. But as of now, I do not see World War III starting off anytime soon, and I hope it never happens. Wars will happen. Wars are something that have always happened. It's how things are done. That's how we humans roll. We are a species of warriors. We resolve our differences in the long run with through wars only. So wars will come and go, but hopefully nothing major. And so yeah, as of now, I don't see World War III erupting anytime soon. Right. Uh, what else do we have? Asmodeus says, if Xi Jinping gets removed, will there be a change in approach towards India? If relations between India and China improve, do both together have the potential to undermine US in the world? So there is always this hope that I see from Indians of some kind of India-China rapprochement, and India-China will form an alliance and work against the West. I don't see that happening. See, if you look, see, it's not about Mr. Xi Jinping or anybody else. It's about the overall policy of the Chinese Communist Party. From 1949, or whenever it was that they came to power, until 2022, what has the official policy of the Chinese Communist Party been? Not through words, but what have their actions been like? They have always been hostile towards India. whether it was the time during the time of Mao Zedong, and during the time when Zhou Enlai was the foreign minister, or whatever he was, or later during the time of Deng Xiaoping, when again there was a small border war between India and China, 1987, yeah, which nobody remembers. Then there were two wars earlier, 1962, which India lost, 1967, that India won. And even in the 2000s, the Chinese started making claims on Arunachal Pradesh. So it's not about a particular individual, it's about the Chinese Communist Party and how they see India. The Chinese Communist Party sees India as a potential long term threat. If India rises, they feel that it will be a big threat towards China, because China holds so many territories that don't belong to them. They hold Tibet. Tibet has always been part of the Indosphere. Tibet was India's part of India's extended sphere of influence and India's extended cultural sphere. They hold that, and as long as the Chinese hold Tibet, India and China are always going to have friction and tensions, which may lead to wars. So the key to the issue is Tibet. It's not the demarcation of the India-China border, which of course the Chinese, again, they don't want even that to happen. So if India rises, it's going to be a threat to China. They know it, and I think you also know it. If India becomes a $10 trillion economy with a massive military, do you not think India would want to take back Tibet, at least free Tibet from China? Of course, it is. That is the solution to all the problems. So no matter who comes to power, let's say Mr. Xi Jinping gets removed and some other person comes to power, it will make no difference in China's approach towards India. China will always be an adversary to India as long as they hold territory that doesn't belong to them, that has historically never been theirs. Tibet, as long as that happens, China and India are going to have this adversarial enemy relationship. Relations between India and China can improve only if India rises, right? So paradoxically, the key to good relations, reasonably good relations, is India's rise. As long as India is a middle power, a small power, like a $3.6 trillion economy, which is not small, but it's not big either. India is a middle power right now. India is a future great power. Everyone now recognizes this, right? So the Chinese don't want that future to ever happen. They don't want India to become a great power. But if India does become a great power, then it will become too strong for the Chinese to ever think about attacking. And then they will be forced to make certain compromises, and there will be a forced peace of sorts. So though that is not good relations, that is China recognizing the fact that they cannot now afford to antagonize India too much. And then there will be a cold peace kind of thing. It will never be warm relations like we had for 2000 years, right? China is 2000, 3000 years old, whatever. So we had good relations between India and China for 2000 years, ever since the Chinese discovered Indian culture through the works of first the Mauryan Empire, then the Kushan Empire under Kanishka the Great, and so on. So India and China always had great relations, but now that they have captured Tibet that doesn't belong to them, they now covet more territory. They want to keep on nibbling away at Indian territory and keep India off balance, keep India always discomfited. That is the policy. That's their official line, or unofficial line, unstated line. That's what they've always done. The salami slicing and nibbling away at small pieces of territory. They keep doing that, and they don't want to uh, demarcate the border for that reason. So the only solution is for India to rise to a minimum $10 trillion economy in the next 10-15 years. The Chinese will do their best not to let that happen, but India has to make that happen. Then there will be a cold peace between India and China. The Chinese will see India as an even bigger threat, but they will not able to do anything about that the way they are able to do right now to some extent. So that's what's happening. So relations between India and China will not improve as long as the Chinese Communist Party holds Tibet. The solution to the entire problem is Tibet. India has to somehow, one way or the other, engineer the liberation of Tibet and the complete deletion of any Chinese influence there. And that's going to take some doing. Yeah. So, is there a possibility of an India-China alliance? No, not as long as the Chinese Communist Party holds Tibet, and most likely not as long as the Chinese Communist Party remains in power. So India and China are not going to work together. They are always going to have an adversarial relationship. There could be sometimes in the future, possibly some kind of agreement of convenience or whatever, but that is not going to last long. This exactly the same way Russia and China right now are working together, but they are long-term enemies. Russia and China are long-term enemies. They are not going to be on good terms in the long-term future. Maybe 10 years, 20 years, and then the old rivalries and issues will re-emerge. Right. So similarly, in the future, there could be some temporary understanding between India and China, but it's not going to be a long-term thing. Yeah. So India essentially doesn't have any real allies. Whatever relationship India has with Russia is a relationship of good understanding, of warmth. There have been historically good ties, and Russia obviously would like to see India rise vis-a-vis China. So that's where we are today. And if you want to undermine the US, I don't want to undermine anybody. I just want India to rise. That's all. It doesn't have to be at somebody else's expense. We can have a multipolar world for now, for some time, and then we'll see. All right. Okay, let's see some other comments. What do we have? Mm, Opinion on Bollywood planning a movie on the Mahabharata. Uh, I don't have a good feeling about it. Yeah. Bollywood planning anything on Indian culture is going to distort Indian culture. I wonder who the old actors they will see. They only have a few actors and actresses that they typically employ for any major role. So it's going to be some 60-year-old actor who's going to play the role of the young Lord Rama and the young Lord Lakshman and Bharat and so on. And the casting will, as far as I see from their track record, I can say that the casting will be bad and they will distort Indian history and culture. So if the movie is made or whatever, I am certainly not going to go and watch it. I'm not going to waste my time and money. Yeah. I would really like to see a long series about the Ramayana and the Mahabharata being made. The kind of production that you have in the Game of Thrones or the House of the Dragon, really well made. 10 episodes per season, maybe 3 seasons, 4 seasons, so 30, 40 episodes, maybe 50 episodes, 1 hour long. That would do justice to something as complicated and as culturally deep and historically vast as the Ramayana or the Mahabharata. Or you could do it through animation. The Japanese, I believe, had done a very good animation like 20, 30 years ago about either the Ramayana or the Mahabharata. Maybe the Ramayana. I would like to see this done, but it should do justice to the events that happened, not some stupid Bollywoodized version that I certainly will not watch. So that's my opinion about this. It's not some great news or anything. I'm certainly not watching. Most likely they will put some, I don't know who they'll put in the titular roles, but yeah, not interesting. Not interested. All right. Why is the US at war with Russia when it is clear that China is the greatest threat enemy right now? No, Russia is. You don't understand how. See, yeah, China is economically the biggest threat right now to the US. The Chinese seek to undermine the so-called whims-based global order that the Americans have created and the entire economic framework that they've created. They seek to bifurcate the system, the global system. So a bunch of countries on China's side, a bunch of countries on the US side, and then let's see who wins. That sort of thing. The Chinese seek to do that. But understand what Russia is. Russia is at number 10 in the top 10 economies, maybe number 11. But if you look at the real GDP, the Russians are not at number two or number three. If you look at the factors in the GDP that really matter, whether it comes to agricultural output or mineral output or energy output or steel output, if you consider only these core factors in a nation's GDP, then Russia is at number two or number three. All the other factors like goods and services and all that stuff, that is fluff. That's how you inflate a GDP. So the real core components of what goes into calculating a GDP, if you only consider that, Russia is at number two or number three. That's why they are able to withstand all the sanctions that the US is throwing at them. It makes no difference to them. They are self-sufficient in energy. Nobody can stop them from. They have more than sufficient reserves of gas and coal and hydrocarbons and oil. They don't need it from anybody else. Again, they have all the industries. They make money. They have steel ore, steel mines, coal mines, and they have enormous amounts of agricultural land. So all the fundamentals are covered right there. So they are completely self-sufficient. They are an autarky, completely self-sufficient nation, and they are a very strong economy. Secondly, they have the world's largest nuclear arsenal. The Russians have a bigger nuclear arsenal than the Americans, and the Chinese don't even figure in this comparison. So the Russians are possibly the greatest military power. Of course, they don't have the kind of network of global network of military bases like the Americans have in Japan, in Germany, all across Europe, in Turkey, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Italy, in the Indian Ocean region. Diego Garcia in Australia. Australia is essentially owned by the US. It's like a US corporation, and so on. The Americans have a network of bases everywhere, military bases, permanent bases, more or less. The Russians don't have that, but they have a very strong military. They have the means to deploy weapons and warheads anywhere they want. So Russia is actually, in some ways, a bigger threat than China, right? And the Americans tried to destroy Russia in the 1990s via Boris Yeltsin. Boris Yeltsin essentially did his best to deliberately and systematically and step by step destroy Russia's economy. He succeeded to a large extent, but then something inconvenient happened. Vladimir Putin came to power, and he rebuilt the economy over a period of about 10-15 years. And then the military again became powerful because the economy stopped crumbling. And today, Russia is again a force to be reckoned with. It's no longer a global superpower like it was 30, 40 years ago, but it's still one of the major powers, and it's a huge threat to the US. So we got to understand this to understand why the US still is trying their best to undermine the Russians in a variety of ways. Okay. Rantman says, can anyone conduct an ashwamedha yagna, or do you have to be a king to do one? I do want to claim control of the universe, just a power hungry medical student here. Ashwamedha yagna. So what was the Ashwamedha yagna? An Ashwamedha yagna was typically done by kings. Okay, so what the king would do is that king would perform a ritual, according to the proper Vedic traditions, in which a horse would be set free to roam and wander wherever he wanted. And it was, I think the time period was 1 year, so the horse would wander and roam anywhere he wanted for 1 year. And any king or other territory that the horse wandered into, that local king would have two choices: either resist the and the horse, wherever he wanders, would be accompanied by soldiers, by essentially battalions and detachment of an army. So if the horse wandered into a neighbor's territory, then the neighboring king would have two choices: either resist the incursion of the horse and the army through warfare, or accept the superiority of the king who is conducting the Ashwamedha Yagna. So either war, or you become a vassal. That were the two options. And and this happened over a period of 1 year, and this is typically how ancient kings of India expanded their territories or tried to expand the territory. Now understand this clearly: what sort of king would even dare to conduct an Ashwamedha Yagna? Only an extremely powerful king with the resources at his disposal would dare to conduct an Ashwamedha Yagna. Let's say I'm a king, and I have 2,000 soldiers, and I have a small kingdom, and I decide that I'm going to conduct the Ashwamedha Yagna. My horse goes into the neighboring king's territory, who's got 20,000 soldiers in a much more territory. What's going to happen? I'm going to be defeated, and I'm going to lose even my territory. So typically, Ashwamedha Yagnas were only conducted by very powerful kings. Other kings would not even dare to think about it. It's only really powerful kings who would conduct this. Now, if you're a medical student and if you want to do this, how many soldiers do you have at your disposal who will obey you without question at a second's notice? You have to take these factors into consideration. Do you have a horse? Are you planning to buy a horse? And if you let your horse loose, what are the authorities, the government of India, going to do about it? Think about these things, right? It's not that simple. It's not just something that you just do on a whim. It has to be thought about very clearly. And typically, what a king would do is that maybe he would prod the horse, or induce the horse through suggestion or whatever, to go in certain directions and in certain king's territories and so on. So this is something that very few kings would dare to do. Only those who were genuinely powerful and they knew that nobody could stop them, only they would do such things. So we have examples of various Vedic kings who have done this during the Ramayana Mahabharata times. And you also have Pushyamitra Shunga, who revived the Ashwamedha Yagna tradition. And then you also have various Gupta emperors who did Ashwamedha Yagnas, especially Chandragupta the first, I believe, and others as well. So only very powerful emperors, not just kings, but emperors, dare to do it. So a power-hungry medical student, it's okay to be power-hungry, but you need to be practical as well. You need to first build an army, and your army needs to have the resources. They need to have the money to feed them, to give them the weapons, ammunition. Then you need to build logistical routes to support and supply the army when it is far away from your home base, when your horses are wandering around. And then you need to be able to ensure that you will not be defeated by whoever is in power wherever your horse goes. So in the Indian subcontinent, the Indian government is in power, and you will not be allowed to indulge in any such misadventure. Yeah, you it won't end well for you. You can send your horse into Pakistan and see what happens there, but then are you in a position to defeat the Pakistani army, who is not a small they don't have a small force, they are pretty well equipped, especially when it comes to an army led by a horse. So think about these things, and only when you know for sure that you will be able to succeed to a certain extent, only then you should think of attempting an Ashwamedha Yagna. All right. Keshav says about Colombia and Pablo Escobar, Plata o Plomo, right? Pablo Escobar, Senor Pablo Escobar. So Pablo Escobar was, well, he was not the greatest drug runner and drug smuggler in history, but maybe number two. The greatest drug smuggler in history was Queen Victoria, Empress of India. She did drug running on a scale that makes Pablo Escobar look like a little mosquito. Anyhow, Pablo Escobar was he had this big cartel in Colombia. He was initially a smuggler of various electronics and small time things, but then he discovered cocaine. I think it was cocaine, maybe some other drugs as well. And then what he started doing is he started growing cocaine. He employed lots of people. It was a very well planned business operation. It was like it started as a startup, but then it became really big. It became a major corporation, and he would have lots of people under his employ. People would grow the plant which gives you cocaine, I believe, coca plant. Yeah. Then he would have engineers, chemical engineers, etc., who would refine the thing and distill the cocaine out of the pure cocaine. Then he would have the entire logistical supply chains. He would have fleets of trucks. He would have fleets of even aircraft, etc. And he had supply routes going all the way into the US, into Miami and other places. And at one point in time, he was even elected to the parliament or whatever it is of Colombia. Yeah. And he had ambitions of becoming the president of Colombia. And he also did social welfare work, and he was a social servant kind of thing, and that sort of thing. So eventually he became too big, and the Americans got involved. It is eventually the Americans that took him out. Yeah, slowly his entire downfall happened. His operations were curtailed. The Colombians, with American support, were able to slowly crack down on various pieces of the corporation, on various supply chains, and lots of seizures happened, and so on and so forth. It's an interesting story. You can learn a lot about how to start a business or operate a business by looking at how the uh, cartels operate. I'm not suggesting you should do anything illegal at all, but the way the organization is structured, how they do things. I think Patrick Bet David also takes a lot of inspiration from the US mafia into how to run a business and so on. So yeah, that's a little bit about Colombia. Colombia is a wonderful little nation in South America. If you want to see where it is, Colombia is here. The capital is Bogota, and the cartel that Pablo Escobar ran was based in the city of Medellin, or whatever you call it. I'm not sure. There was another cartel in Cali, the Cali cartel, and they had I think, boats or yachts that would transport the material to the Cayman Islands. I believe, was it Cayman Islands? This There was an island called Norman's Cay somewhere here that was one of the bays of operations in the Bahamas. Was it? I'm not sure where it was. He had a lieutenant called Carlos Leder, who used to transport a lot of this produce into the US through planes. So these planes would fly very low, and they would come across Mexico, and they would enter the southern US, and then they would offload their cargo, and that's how it made its way to the US. And there's a lot of US government involvement in all this as well, because they also kind of, they supported certain cartels. I suppose it is said by some commentators that maybe they still do. Even when it comes to Afghanistan, the Americans did support the growing of opium poppies and all that for various operations and all. So yeah, it's a murky thing, and there's a whole lot of stuff that you typically don't get to see. Right. Yeah, I already answered about Colombia, Pablo Escobar. What else do we have? Uh, Let us see. Let us see. What other questions do we have? Um, Akshay says, why didn't Indians incorporate composite bows and other military inventions? What was it the reason why Prithviraj Chauhan lost the Battle of Tarain due to Ghazni's agile archers harassing Prithviraj Chauhan's army? The composite bow was most likely invented in India. The double curved bow that you see Lord Rama in depictions using, that's also invented in India. So, what's a composite bow? It's a bow that's made out of not just one piece of wood, but multiple things, multiple layers and elements of wood, maybe bone also, all all engineered and fused together into a single instrument or weapon. That's the composite bow. It's not a standard simple bow is made out of a single piece of wood that you bend through and you attach a rope or cord at the end, and then you pull it, and that sort of thing. Composite bows have better tensile strength, and they have multiple advantages over your standard low tech bow. I think the composite bow was used by the Mongols, by the Tatars, and so on. And I think most likely it was invented in India thousands of years ago. So Indians did use it. I'm not sure what weapons Prithviraj Chauhan used in the second Battle of Tarain. Why did Prithviraj Chauhan lose the second Battle of Tarain? Because he won the first Battle of Tarain and allowed, either through commission or omission, he allowed that guy Ghazni to escape. And because of this, Mahmud of Ghazni was able to go back to his base in Kandahar, in Ghazni. And by that time, he had already tasted the style of warfare that the Rajputs had. He had been defeated once, I think about 2 decades before the first Battle of Tarain. He had been defeated somewhere in Punjab to a Rajput army. Later, he tried to uh, invade Western India, and he suffered a catastrophic defeat to the Solanki queen, what's her name, Naiki Devi, in the Battle of Kayadara in northern Gujarat, southern Rajasthan, near Abu, right? And then he again lost the first Battle of Tarain to Prithviraj Chauhan. So, because of all these massive multiple defeats that he survived, he was able to understand the Rajput tactics, the Indian tactics of how the Indians fought. And eventually, he was able to find the solution to how to deal with this. And that's why, approximately 1 year after the first Battle of Tarain, he again invaded India. He again met Prithviraj Chauhan, and this time he was able to defeat Prithviraj Chauhan, right? So that's the reason why Prithviraj Chauhan lost the second Battle of Tarain. He allowed this guy, the invader, to escape. We know what happened. Some people say that the Afghans, the invaders, had better horses, nimble horses, and horses that could run faster than the Rajput horses and all that. Whatever it is, once you defeat your enemy, you have to ensure that enemy is crushed forever. Maybe Prithviraj Chauhan was overconfident. He said, "Okay, they've gone too far, and let them go," or whatever. That should not have happened. This guy, the Ghazni was injured. He had to be rescued by one of his soldiers. He was put on horseback, and then they tried to escape, and they were allowed to escape. The point is simple: as a ruler, as a king, you can't make excuses that they were too fast, or there was this happened or that happened. You have to find a way of achieving your objectives. And Prithviraj Chauhan did not achieve his objective. Maybe he did not even think about it. So that's why Prithviraj Chauhan 1 year later lost the second battle of the Rhine. Okay, okay. What else? Thousands of questions. Some questions people are asking repeatedly. Let's see something else. Let's see something else. Hmm. What else? Willybond 00007 says, "What are you going to do with your power is the question. To build luxurious homes for yourself or to make everyone prosperous?" Good question. So think about the kings and queens, the monarchs of Europe. They were very powerful in the past 500 years. Let's talk about the British Empire, right? The kings and queens of England, they became very powerful because of the conquests of and colonization of many parts of the world, including India, including parts of Africa. They became very powerful. They became very wealthy as a result of all this. What did they do? They built palaces. They built luxurious homes for themselves. What was the lot of the people that they ruled? The people that they ruled were still in poverty. Europe has a feudal system. Please understand this. Only now it has changed. Europe has a feudal system. You have the lords, you have the nobility, that are the people who serve the lords, and then you have the peasants. Most people are peasants. Maybe 95% of the population used to be peasants. The European aristocracy and royalty, where did it originally derive its wealth and power from? They derived it from agricultural lands. So let's take England, for instance. The crown, the king of England, he was the owner of all the land in England. People who had farms and all were actually allowed to use the farms and do all the agriculture on the land that was officially that of the king. Right? So all the land belonged to the king, and whatever agriculture was done, the farmers, the peasants had to pay massive taxes to these to the king, to the crown. And then you had the various nobles. These are people who were allowed to have lands of their own, but they were technically again owned by the king, but they were allowed to have their own lands, employ their own farmers there, and collect taxes from the farmers and give some of the tax to the king or queen. And these nobles, the so-called nobles, they were allowed to have their own armies, personal armies, that could be called upon by the king at any time whenever it was required. So the deal was that they would uh, offer the army in the king's service anytime they wanted. So that is the original power structure. The peasants were the most oppressed. They had almost no rights. There was a lot of slavery for a very long time in the British Islands and so on. Then they colonized the world and they enriched themselves, and yet the peasants were always poor. Even 100 years ago, or 150 in the 19th century, London was a terrible place. London was a terrible place. You have no idea about this. People used to dump human waste on the streets in the mornings, you know. And the aristocracy and the nobility, they used to travel in horse-drawn carriages with the windows closed so that they don't have to come in contact with the common people and the dirt and the filth. Yeah, that's how it was. So what are you going to do with your power is the question. It all depends on the system. It all depends on the king or queen. When you have kings and queens who believe that the entire purpose of power and wealth is to serve themselves and not the people, then you're going to have situations like the one that I just mentioned. On the other hand, if you have a king or a queen that acts on the principle that the highest morality for them is to serve the nation and the people, and to ensure that the nation and the people prosper. In that case, when the king becomes powerful, when the nation becomes powerful, it's going to benefit the entire society, all the people of the nation. So that's the kind of difference you see. In Egypt, the kings and queens, the pharaohs, with their enormous uh, power and wealth, they constructed enormous pyramids. I cannot even begin to imagine how much money and how much time and how much labor would have gone into constructing these massive pyramids. Did these pyramids benefit the people of Egypt? No, it did nothing for the people of Egypt. When these kings and queens of Europe, they built these enormously luxurious palaces and castles, did it benefit the people? No. But that is all seen as symbols of greatness. In India, we had the construction of enormous regions of metropolitan regions, a fully urbanized society, a fully urban civilization 5,000 years before today. No palaces. Yeah. So that's the difference. So it all depends on what your values are, what your cultural values and ethics are. If you believe that the whole world is a resource that is to be that you can extract from, then you're going to have a very uh, this sort of European kind of Abrahamic kind of mindset. But if you believe that the highest duty and highest morality of a king is to serve the people and the nation and ensure the prosperity, then you're going to have the whole nation prospering. And I hope that answers the question. All right, all right. Avirup Ukil says, what is the minimum wavelength that a photon can have? Uh, the more energetic a photon, the shorter its wavelength. And the less energetic a photon, the longer its wavelength. That's how it is. Frequency and wavelength are reciprocals of each other. So when you have gamma rays, the most energetic photons, you have extremely short wavelengths. When you have X-rays, which are also ionizing radiation, you have short wavelengths. Then visible light has longer wavelengths. Infrared light has even longer wavelengths, and so on and so forth. So what is the minimum wavelength a photon can have? It would be the wavelength of the most energetic gamma rays. So yeah, that's how I would say. And what's the maximum wavelength a photon could have? The maximum wavelength a photon could have is infinity when it is redshifted out of existence. So I don't know exactly what is the typical wavelength of a gamma ray, but whatever it is, divide that by 100, and that's possibly the most energetic gamma ray you can have. So the most energetic photons are those that are born in the cores of stars, and the ones that were born in the very early universe when the universe was still dark. So one of the interesting things that you people, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. If you were to, if I could give you a suit, a space suit that you can wear, and it will allow you to go right inside a star without getting burned, then what do you think you will see if you go right to the inside of a star? You have a star, and you're able to go all the way inside a star to its very core. What do you think you will see? I imagine most people think that inside a star, it's just brightness, right? Bright light. But that's not the case. Inside a star, it's dark. It's completely dark inside a star. You go to the core of the sun, you will not be able to see anything. It's just blackness, darkness. It's only outside that you will see uh, in the atmosphere of the sun, and outside that you see light. And the photons that are born inside the core of the sun, they typically take approximately 1 million years to be able to escape the sun. So the sun is so dense inside that you have the situation. All right, let's see some other question. You see, I don't memorize the wavelengths and all these things, so okay. Yeah, anyway, what what other questions do we have? I answered this question just some time ago, about an hour ago. We don't know what's happening there. We don't know what's happening in China. Maybe there's a coup, maybe something else happening, but something clearly unusual is happening in China. Okay. Vanos says, why doesn't the government fix our broken education system? Wouldn't a good education system and infrastructure be good for our country and therefore good for India's development? I have been saying this for the longest time. I have 2 or 3 episodes only about education. I don't know, what is it, episode 30, 31, somewhere around there. Yeah. The government needs to fix the education system. The education system is the root of all India's problems, actually. All the mental colonization, um, all the problems that you have, all the false beliefs, the entire attitude of trying to memorize things without understanding them, the inferiority complex, it all comes from India's education system. So why doesn't the government fix it? Because the education system is a goddamn cartel. It is something that is the education system. It promotes mediocrity. It does two things. First of all, it seeks out, identifies, and destroys talent. Think about Ramanujan, how incredibly talented he was, but the education system nearly destroyed him. Srinivas Ramanujan. And so it identifies, seeks out, and destroys talent. And secondly, it promotes mediocrity. In the education system, what kind of professors are promoted? Those who are great at doing politics, not those who are great at doing research or who are very knowledgeable. It's always a political game. So the most political and most mediocre rise to the very top. That's typically what you see in the Indian education system. So you have a whole network of colleges and universities, all of whom are ruled by mediocrities. Not all, maybe 99%, maybe 98%. Some of the academics and professors, etc., would be good for sure. Maybe 1%, maybe 2% are great. But 95, 98% of them are mediocre. Yeah. So you have a whole network, the entire system, hundreds of universities, thousands of colleges, all ruled by mediocrity. Right? You try to reform that. Don't you think there'll be resistance to that? The entire system will rebel against you, right? And we know what's happening. Even in the IITs, you have these humanities departments that are populated by anti-India academics and so on. So the education system is a leftover of the 19th century colonial system. Today they will teach you computer science, and they will teach you, they will offer you MBAs, but the system is the same. The system is still the same. It's run the same way as it was in the 19th century. Long examinations in which you have to write essay length answers. You have to memorize things. You don't learn anything at all, and so on. The only skill you acquire is how to pass exams. So this is a system. It's like the bureaucracy. If you have a job as a professor or a lecturer or whatever, a reader in a government college or university, you have a job for life, just like the IAS. That's how it is. And you try to reform that, they're going to resist. You try to reform the IAS, they will all go on strike. The nation will be paralyzed. Similarly, you try to reform the education system, the entire system will resist you, and there's going to be political outcomes of that. Because this system was created by the previous political regime. They benefited from that. So that's why it's so difficult for the government to do this. It's going to invite a huge amount of resistance. The media will get involved. They will say that the government is going all fascist. They're trying to destroy what's good, and so on. And all of you will believe this. All of you will believe what the media says, right? So that's why whenever the government has tried to implement major reforms, there has been a massive backlash from political parties, from the media, and all of you also, most of you believe that the government is doing something wrong, whether it's the farm laws, whether it's Agnipath. And I know I'm going to see comments now saying that I'm wrong. So that's the problem. Whenever you try to implement some good, really good major reforms, there is this massive backlash, which is orchestrated by political parties, many of which are funded by abroad, most likely, not all, many, and the media, which again is funded by various political parties and also by other countries. So anytime you try to take the nation in the right direction, there is a major backlash. There will be protests on the streets. All the colleges and universities will have protests, by paid students, or maybe not paid students. Maybe they truly believe it. And so the government doesn't want to take this up right now. There are bigger problems to solve. Those will be solved first. Then these issues will be taken care of when the government feels the time is right. The real problem is the people of India, who are so easily misled by political parties and by the media. The real problem is that. And that's why the government doesn't want to take up such difficult tasks right now. It makes sense, actually. Here you are. Anyway, that's fine. Okay, let's take some other questions. AK the guy says, did the Neanderthals have a tail? And did they and Homo sapiens coexist like a society or not? So the Neanderthals did not have tails. The Neanderthals were a separate subspecies of humans, um, closely related to Homo sapiens, and they seem to have appeared in Eurasia at least 600,000 or so years before today. Homo sapiens, our ancestors, they came into Asia about 85 or 90,000 years before today. And we are the descendants of that out of Africa migration. The Neanderthals were in Eurasia about half a million years before that, roughly, give or take. They were very, very closely related to us. They did not have tails. They had a slightly different physique. They were more heavily built, larger bones, maybe more muscular. Yeah. And did they and Homo sapiens coexist as a society or not? Well, most non-African humans have a certain amount of Neanderthal origin DNA, which means they did not simply coexist, they interbred and they produced offspring together. So a Neanderthal mother or father and a Homo sapiens mother or father would procreate together and produce an offspring that was half Homo sapiens, half Neanderthal. Yeah. So typically when you have two distinct species, let's say chimpanzees and gorillas, they cannot produce offspring together because there is too much genetic difference between them. Whether it is a tiger and a lion, I think they can produce offspring, but the offspring are typically infertile or whatever. So the Neanderthals and the humans were so genetically close together, so genetically alike, that they did interbreed, they did produce offspring together. And most non-African humans have a little bit of Neanderthal ancestry, around 4 to 6%, maybe 4 to 8%, depending on where you're looking. But from what I understand, most Indians don't have any Neanderthal ancestry. Anyway, that's a whole different story. So we don't know if the Neanderthals and Homo sapiens coexisted as a society, but they did certainly meet and they did certainly produce offspring together. And we still see that in most non-African uh, people alive today. And some of those Neanderthal genes give us protection, give these people protection against certain diseases and all that. So it's something that's been beneficial to humans, to Homo sapiens. All right, where are we? Shantanu says, why are we as Indians lagging behind as far as technology is concerned? Was ancient Bharat ahead in technology than the West at that time? Ancient Bharat was always technologically the most advanced civilization. Always. Even in the second millennium AD, India was still in many ways more advanced. India was the first completely advanced civilization, completely fully industrialized civilization. India was. The British destroyed India's industries because they wanted to dump their cheaply manufactured garbage into India and make Indians pay for that. There was one of the ways in which they extracted wealth out of India by dumping their cheap mass produced textiles and other things into India, so that Indians would buy them, Indians would be forced to buy them, and they would sell them at very high prices. And that's one of the easy ways of extracting incredible amounts of wealth out of India. To do that, they had to destroy India's indigenous industries, and they did that in a variety of ways. So India was always technologically the most advanced civilization. India had the greatest shipbuilding industry in the world. India produced the best steel in the world, and so many other things, right? So why is India lagging behind today? Because we are continuing the system that the colonizers created. The Indian system is a continuation of the colonial system. Nothing has changed after 1947. How do you become a technologically advanced nation? First of all, you need to have a good education system, a purely meritocratic education system. Secondly, you need to eliminate corruption so that the companies and the industries and the startups thrive. Thirdly, you need to make the system pro industry. It should be really easy to start a business and conduct business in India. Today it's not that way. There's so much red tape, and there's been lots of reforms in the past 7-8 years, and yet we are still not where we should be. It should be really easy to start a business. Why does it even today take like 7 days, 10 days, 15 days? I don't know how long it takes to even register a business. There are certain countries in which you can do it within one day. In India, it's a whole long procedure. You have to fill up so many forms and submit it here and submit it there, and you need to hire a CA and God knows what, all kinds of things, right? It's very involved. It's really hard to start a business, and then there is so much compliance and all that stuff. So it's these are the problems. These are the problems. And then when you have a business or an industry in a certain city, you are at the mercy of the local politicians. So there are all these issues. It's the internal problems that are creating that are the cause of India lagging behind in technology. Today you have the government that is involved in many of the technological advancements. We have ISRO, which is a government run organization. ISRO is doing reasonably well. We have DRDO, which is a government run organization. DRDO is doing okay. We have HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, all these are government run organizations. DRDO is not well run. It has 5,000 scientists and 25,000 non scientists who are employees. Why does it have 25,000 non scientists? All the salary, all the money is going into that, into all the money that is in on the budget of DRDO for 1 year. A significant portion of that is going into the salaries of the non-scientific staff. Why do you need even one non-scientific person in DRDO? So that's how badly mismanaged these things are. And why can't we allow private players the opportunity to become the next DRDO or ISRO or HAL or whatever? So there are so many reforms that need to be done. There is a long way to go, but hopefully we are going in the right direction. This government clearly wants to make it happen. So these are the reasons why India thus far has been lagging behind in technology, and hopefully it will not remain this way for too long. Madara Uchiha says, even though Aryan invasion, migration, tourism, picnic theory has been proved wrong, why do we still divide our languages into Aryan and Dravidian? That's what the system does. That's what the education system does. That's what academia does. I don't do it. The languages have been artificially divided by colonizers into these two fake artificial categories, Aryan and Dravidian. Let's take two languages, Marathi and Kannada. Marathi is classified as an Aryan language. Kannada is classified as a Dravidian language, right? So Marathi is part of the Indo-European language family, and Kannada is part of the Dravidian language family. So if you take Marathi and a random other Indo-European language, let's say German, if you speak Marathi and you hear somebody speak German, how much do you understand? 0%. If you speak Marathi and you hear somebody speaking Kannada, you will understand 30-40% of what they are saying. Do you get that? And yet Marathi is part of a separate language family and Kannada is separate. This is nonsense. This is absolute nonsense. No matter which so-called Dravidian language you take, it is way closer to any of the so-called Indo-Aryan languages than to any other Indo-European language which is from outside of India. Even the Indo-Iranian languages, which are a larger subset of the Indo-Aryan languages, they are much closer to any of the so-called Dravidian languages than to the European languages. So this entire classification scheme is completely wrong. It doesn't make any sense. And yet our academics faithfully, like good colonial slaves, keep on parroting the good old 19th century academic colonial paradigm. So I have never said that we have Aryan and Dravidian languages. I said that we have to revisit this entire thing. We have to revisit India's linguistics a priori from scratch. We need to revisit this entire thing properly. And we need to create a new group of linguistics researchers who are not influenced by this nonsense, by the colonial nonsense. So it needs to happen. The government needs to create a new institute of linguistics or institutes of linguistics where young researchers in their early 20s who have not been contaminated by the slave mindedness, they will start looking at this from scratch and create a proper classification scheme that makes sense logically. Yeah. So yeah, that again is something that needs to be done, and it's something that will happen someday, hopefully, I hope, in the future. Yes, this is the most popular question for today. What's happening in China right now? Any speculations? We don't know. We don't know what's happening in China. Something clearly is wrong. Something very unusual is happening in China. The skies over Beijing are clear. Not a single plane is taking off or landing. That never happens. Beijing is one of the busiest airports in the entire world, not only in China, in the entire world. And thousands of flights have been cancelled, and thousands of trains have also been cancelled. Something very strange is happening. Mr. Xi Jinping is not visible. He's not to be seen in public. He rushed back to China after the SCO summit where he met Mr. Putin, where he stood next to Mr. Modi. He rushed back to China for some reason. After that, he has not been seen in public. So something is going on. We don't know what it is. I think time will tell us. Maybe I will revisit this in tomorrow's session if we have some more clarity on what's happening. How to live a life like Mikhail Kalashnikov in India? I don't know. I don't know much about Mikhail Kalashnikov. The name obviously rings a bell. Ding, ding, ding. So Mikhail Kalashnikov was an engineer. He was an inventor. He invented a certain weapon in 1947, which was called the Kalashnikov 47. Automat Kalashnikov 47, AK-47. And then a new version of that came out in 56, Automat Kalashnikov 56, AK-56. And today you have newer versions of the Kalashnikov series family of rifles. Extremely good rifle, works in almost any conditions, very reliable, very easy to use. And that's why it's a favorite of armed forces worldwide, even terrorists and various insurgents and freedom fighters worldwide. Yeah, that's how it is. So yeah, that's what I can tell you about Mikhail Kalashnikov and his invention. I don't know what kind of life he lived, so I would not be able to answer that. But yeah, that's what Mr. Kalashnikov is famous for. All right, okay. I get this. Aditya says Fox News anchor Tucker Carlson tried to justify British colonization of India, that India became civilized after the colonial rule. And the West ignored this statement completely. My thoughts. I'm not surprised at all. So, the first thing is this guy, Tucker Carlson, he's one of the prominent right wing voices in the US media. Right now, the US media is mostly left wing. Right is all demonized, right? MAGA, the Trump folks and all that, the Republicans. So Tucker Carlson is one of the prominent, so supposedly right-wing voices in the US. And when this old lady died, what's her name? Elderly lady, the Queen of England, what's her name? Elizabeth. So when she died, he praised her to the high heavens. He eulogized her, and he then made the statement that British colonization was good for India. Without British colonization, we would not have civilization and architecture and whatnot. So what are my thoughts about this? I'm not surprised. First of all, many Indians, especially the so-called right-wing Indians, they try to make common cause with the right wing in the US and in Europe. Please understand this. They are just as Indo-phobic as anybody else. They are just as white supremacist as anybody else. These days, it is not fashionable to espouse white supremacism and Western supremacy in the US, especially because of the kind of, the political climate. But below the surface, that sentiment is very much there. So Tucker Carlson, and these days it is not advisable at all to make any statements against certain religions in the West. You would be called this phobic or that phobic. Yeah. And these days it is no longer fashionable to denigrate the people of African origin, right? So then who's left? India. So it's perfectly fine to be Hindu phobic or Indo-phobic or try to portray India as a backward country or whatever, and nobody's going to say anything about it. Had he said the same thing about, let's say, Saudi Arabia, or had he said the same thing about some African country, there would have been a ton of repercussions for Tucker Carlson. But as long as he does it for about India, it's perfectly fine. So my thoughts is that I am not surprised at all, and he's completely wrong. India was a civilization when the West, well, I don't want to go that far, but yeah, when they were very primitive. Yeah, India is the oldest known civilization on the planet, at least 10,000 years old. India was technologically and civilizationally incredibly highly developed even 5,000 years before today. The largest, completely urbanized, fully industrialized civilization of the ancient world. About 5,000 years before today, the Saraswati Sindhu phase of Indian history, which was the territorial extent was greater than Egypt and Mesopotamia put together It was that big. It was completely urbanized, completely all metropolitan areas, very well planned cities, extremely high technology, great hydro engineering, and so on. So I don't think there's anything we need to prove. Our architecture is, it surpasses anything the West can produce. It's been doing that for thousands of years. I'm not talking about the monument of the invaders, which is the Taj Mahal. I'm talking about all the other monumental architecture we have had, which has been built for public use in India. All the great temples, which also served as educational institutions, and so much more. Right. So yeah, there's nothing more we need to say about this. Right. Okay. Kushagra says, what if Pakistan Bang corridor emerged in India? Oh, Pakistan Bangladesh corridor. I think that's what Mr. Gandhi wanted, right? Mr. Mohandas Gandhi. He wanted to allow the Pakistanis to create a land corridor, land bridge between East Pakistan and West Pakistan through India. The Pakistanis had made this demand that we want a land corridor. And I think Mr. Gandhi was in favor of that. So imagine if that had been allowed, then they would have had access. I mean, they would have had sovereignty to Indian territory, and then that would have, well, obviously not been good for India. I mean, I'm glad that better sense prevailed, and Mr. Gandhi was not able to have his way, which was Pakistan's way. So, had a Pakistan-Bangladesh corridor emerged in India, it would not have been good for India. It would have given Pakistan an advantage over India, and of course, it is something that is completely under India's control. Obviously, so was there a war or something which did happen eventually? We would have been able to cut it off. But anyway, it was not a good idea. It was a ridiculous idea, and it's strange that Mr. Gandhi, the great Indian Mahatma, supported that. Very strange. Very strange. Very strange. Uh, yes, yes, it would have been a total disaster. Total. Okay, what else do we have? All kinds of questions. Vanas Spots says, could you tell us about the Chavda dynasty? Well, it's one of the older and obscure, more obscure dynasties in India. There are lots of dynasties that no one writes about or speaks about. The history textbooks have forgotten. So this is a dynasty that existed in Western India, in Gujarat, Northern Gujarat, Western Gujarat, in the 7th, 8th centuries. The oldest king of this dynasty was Jayashekhar Chavda, who lost his kingdom to an invasion from somewhere. Then his wife escaped to the forests when this invasion happened, and she gave birth to a son about 6 months after his father died. This son was raised in the forest. That's why he was called Vanraj. He eventually regained his father's kingdom, and he was the one of the great kings of Gujarat. And it is during the rule of Vanraj Chavda that Gujarat acquired a separate a socio-cultural identity. It emerged as a separate culture of its own, that sort of thing, a separate cultural identity, and the language also started changing. And this dynasty lasted until the 900s, 942 AD or so. And the last king was childless, and he was not a very strong king. And his nephew, his sister's son, uh, usurped the throne and started a new dynasty, which was called the Solanki dynasty. So that is in brief about the Chavda dynasty. It was a reasonably strong dynasty at some point in time, and the oldest ruler of this dynasty that seems to be on the record is a ruler called Vyagramukh Chavda, who ruled in Bhinmal in Rajasthan, and he seems to have been a Hunnik king. He That dynasty at the time was called the Sri Chapa dynasty. Later, it was called the Chavda dynasty. So this king seems to have been a Hunnik king who had taken the name of this dynasty, Sri Chapa dynasty, and he was a great king. He was the patron of the great scientist Brahmagupta. So yeah, we don't know the origins, the deeper origins of this dynasty. They seem to be linked to the Scythian king Nahapana, perhaps. So there isn't sufficient evidence to either confirm or deny that. So it's one of the more obscure parts of Indian history, but it was significant for some time, and it is during the reign of this dynasty that Gujarat emerged as a separate uh, socio-cultural entity. Yeah. Okay. What else? What else? What else? What else? Harsh Kumar says, why are most people right handed while no other animals prefer a specific arm? I don't have the answer to this. I believe polar bears are left handed. Most polar bears seem to be exclusively left handed. Humans, most of us are right handed, some of us are left handed. I don't know about other species. Cats seem to be equally adept with both arms. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure. I think there must be some answer, but I have not been able to find it this far. So maybe I will revisit this, but it's a very interesting question. Why did we evolve this way? Why we have two hands, so shouldn't we be able to use both hands equally well? And in some cases, people also have a preferred ear and a preferred eye also. Like when you have to cover one eye for shooting, some people tend to only cover one eye, not both eyes. Like they prefer one eye over the other and one ear over the other. I'm not sure if it's always the right eye, the right ear, like the right hand, but interesting question. And yeah, let me try and find out why it is so. So maybe in a future episode I will look into that. um Vanos is left-handed. Outstanding, sir, outstanding. I think left-handers have a certain advantage over right-handers because the whole world is made for right-handers. So if you're left-handed, it gives you some advantage in sports and things like that. Opposable thumbs, yeah, that could be a reason, but we have two opposable thumbs, so why can't we use both equally well? Cats obviously don't have opposable thumbs. Bears don't have opposable thumbs, but bears seem to be mostly left-handed. What about our cousins, the chimpanzees and gorillas? Do they also have this preference for a certain hand? Interesting questions, and I don't have the answers right now, but I will certainly look into this. All right, let's see some other questions. Rishabh says, why is the Pashtun language classified as part of the Iranian language family system when even none of the words are mutually intelligible to the Persian language? I think if Indians pay attention, like close attention to somebody speaking Pashto, we can actually make out some of what they are saying. Their Pashto should be an Indo-Aryan language actually. But yeah, the great academicians and linguists have placed Pashto in the Iranian language family, Indo-Iranian language family, or Iranian language. So today, if you talk to people of Pashtun origin, they'll say, no, no, we are Persians. Our language is an Iranian language, and blah blah blah. And yet, it's there's not much in common. See, there is going to be something in common between Pashto and Iranian and Persian, just like there is a lot in common between, let's say, Hindi in Persian, or Punjabi in Persian, or Rajasthani in Persian. The languages are actually quite close to, quite similar. The first time you hear the Persian language, it will sound like a foreign alien language. But if you get used to it, if you listen closely, it starts making a bit of sense to you. Persians who come to live in India or study in India, they pick up Hindi very, very quickly, and they become fluent, just like a local, almost like a local in Hindi. That's how easy it is for them to learn Hindi because the languages are very close. I think the Pashto language is actually closer to the Indo-Aryan languages, so-called Indo-Aryan languages, than to the Iranian languages. But linguists have decided to put Pashto in that category. So yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We know that Gandhar was part of ancient India, and Pashto is a language that has emerged out of Gandhar. Right? The Pashtun people are the the original inhabitants, the original natives of Gandhar, descendants of the Prithu people and the Pakhta people, those Rigvedic clans. And genetically, also studies have shown that the Pashtun people are essentially an extension of the North Indian population. So yeah, it doesn't make sense for the Pashto language to be part of the Iranian language family, but that's where it is right now. So that's why I say that we need to revisit the entire categorization and classification of Indian or subcontinental languages, and we need to revisit this and do this a priori from scratch. All right. Uh, is there any chance the Russian army bounces back in the winter? So you are assuming that they are undergoing a bunch of setbacks right now. That's what the media is telling us. Why do we have to trust the media? Why do we believe the media? They have banned Russian news outlets from social media. Whichever social media platform you can think of, Russian news outlets have been banned. So the only news reports we get today are from the Western perspective. Even the Indian news outlets, there are like two, three news outlets in India, two, three TV channels in India that cover what they call geopolitics. Yeah. They also send their reporters to Ukraine on Ukrainian territory or Ukrainian controlled territory. They have not sent a single reporter in Russian controlled territory. Why is there this lopsided coverage, this unbalanced coverage? We should see what's happening on both sides. So we are only getting news reports from the Western perspective. The Indian media completely parrots the Western line. So we cannot trust what comes out of these reports. We simply can't trust it. Right now, they are claiming the Russians are falling back and they are suffering big losses and all. Hey. Let's see after a month or two what the map looks like of who controls what. Yeah, let's see what it is. So, and yeah, when it comes to winter, the Russians typically do well in winter. Winter has typically, historically, been Russia's ally, whether it comes to the Napoleonic invasion of Russia, the winter ended up destroying Napoleon's army, or whether we're talking about Operation Barbarossa, which was Hitler's attempted invasion of Russia. The Nazi army, the Wehrmacht, reached almost at the doorstep of Moscow, but then they paid the price of not being able to succeed. Not being able to succeed. The price they paid, the punishment they suffered was the winter, the Russian winter. And the Russian army obviously knows how to deal with its own winter. So one would expect that as the winter rolls in, Russia would have a big advantage in whatever it is planning to do. So, yes, whether it is bouncing back or going further forward, Russia will most likely do well in the frigid Russian winter. Okay, AJ says depopulation is going on in full swing across the world the last 2 years. Future thoughts on this? One does see fertility rates falling all across Europe and the Western world. And the fertility rates are way below the replacement rate. The replacement rate of a population is when each woman, on average, has 2.1 children. On average. Yeah. And right now, in the past 2 3 years, especially after the pandemic, we are seeing fertility rates crashing very badly in Europe, in the Americas, and so on. In China, the fertility rate is below replacement. In Japan, it is way below replacement. India is just at replacement or slightly below now. So, yeah, if it continues like this, you're going to have depopulation. Long run, 100 years, 200 years. The world could have a significantly smaller population. So, that may not be the best thing in the world. Obviously, we should not have too many humans as well, billions and billions. It may not be good for the planet. It is certainly not good for the planet. It imposes a massive resource crunch on the planet, which means that all the planet's resources are now uh, taken over by just one species. 100 years ago, 99% of the non-human biomass on the planet was wild animals. 99%, 100 years ago, wild animals. Today, 99% of the non-human biomass is domestic animals, sheep and cows and chickens and all that. Only 1% is wild animals. That's how drastically we have destroyed the planet. So if the human population declines, it may not be a very bad thing, but it may not be a very good thing either for nations. So one needs to have some kind of balance. I think Elon Musk speaks about this, right? That the depopulation is coming. It's not a good thing. We need to actually increase our population. So a depopulation will affect certain nations more than other nations, and that's going to have geopolitical consequences. Japan could cease being a major power in the next 100 years. The fertility rate has dropped so badly. The population is aging. I'm not sure what the average age of the average Japanese person is. Must be in the late 40s, more than 45. That is terrible. So the average person is in their late 40s, most likely. Even when it comes to China, the population is getting older and older. Now they have stopped their one child policy, but maybe it's too late, and they're going to have a big crash of their population. And there's going to be fewer and fewer people um, who can be part of the workforce, right? So that's going to be problematic for China. Now, when it comes to India, we are still kind of okay. We already have a massive, huge population, 1.3 something billion, close to 1.4 billion. So it is important for India to manage the population, not let it become too large. But obviously, we don't want there to be a massive and very rapid population crash as well. So yeah, it's something that will have to be managed. So yeah, that's where we are. That's where we are, and it will definitely have a certain geopolitical consequences. All right. Yeah, Porus. Okay, what is this? Shantanu says, can you elaborate on the history of Porus and the war between him and Alexander? What's your take on the statement that Alexander was defeated by Porus or Chandragupta Maurya? I have never seen a statement about Alexander and Chandragupta Maurya. So Alexander was this brutal Greek warlord who rampaged his way east of Macedonia. He destroyed the Persian Empire. He burned the capital city of the Persians, and yeah, and then he decided to try invading India because he wanted to conquer the whole world. So he reached Western India, the outskirts of Western India. At that time, most likely it was the Nanda Empire that was ruling India, the Nanda dynasty, and so Alexander did destroy various settlements along the Sindhu River, the Indus River. He did a lot of atrocities, killed lots of people. He was a very bloodthirsty person. He crucified lots of people alive in Persia and parts of Greece and all that. He did a lot of atrocities. So in India also he did such things. But then he came across this army of this small district level chieftain called Purushottam in Western India. And this district level Purushottam, this guy, he nearly defeated Alexander. If you take the Greek accounts seriously, you hear that the Greeks tell you that Alexander faced a tough fight, but he was able to defeat Purushottam, and then because of his magnanimity, he allowed Purushottam to remain the king, but as a vassal to Alexander. That's what the Greeks tell us, right? But the truth is that Porus, they call him Porus. So Porus was a very small chieftain, one of hundreds of chieftains in Western India. It's like a district level administrator. That's what he was, and he nearly defeated Alexander, if you believe the Greek sources. Now, the funny thing is that not a single Indian source speaks about Alexander. Not a single Indian historian or ancient record mentions Alexander at all, even though there are mentions of his successor, Seleucus Nicator. Yeah. So that is strange that the Indians did not consider Alexander important enough to even mention him in their history. Strange, isn't it? So we know that Alexander possibly defeated Purushottam, and then we know that his soldiers rebelled against him, because Alexander then said that we will go further east and we will fight the Nanda Empire. And the soldiers said, have you gone mad? And they rebelled against him, they mutinied against him, and they forced Alexander to retrace his path and go back westwards to Babylon, where he is said to have died of something, either alcohol poisoning or malaria, or maybe from the wounds and injuries he suffered during his attempted invasion of India. So that's what I can say about this. Had he tried invading India further east from where he was, he would have been totally annihilated. That's how powerful the Nanda Empire was. The Nanda king was not a good king. It was a very unpopular dynasty, the Nanda dynasty, and yet they had a very, very powerful military machine, which was very rapidly defeated by Chandragupta Maurya under the guidance of Vishnugupta Chanakya. So, just a couple of decades after the defeat of Alexander, or the eviction of Alexander from India, you have his successor Seleucus Nicator coming back to reclaim some territory, and there was a brief war between the Seleucid Empire and the Mauryan Empire. So the Mauryans, in just less than 2 decades, had defeated the Nanda Empire and created their own empire in India, right? Chandragupta Maurya. So most likely it was the Nanda Empire that was in power when Alexander tried invading, not the Maurya Empire, most likely. but there is still a little bit of confusion. But we have to go by the mainstream consensus that it was the Nanda Empire, not the Mauryan Empire. So Alexander was defeated by Porus, or maybe he defeated Porus, whatever version you want to believe. But the end result was that Alexander was forced to retreat from India. Whether he won or he lost, the end result was that Alexander was forced to retreat from India because his soldiers were too frightened to move further east into the heartland of India. They simply refused to follow his orders, to obey his orders. Can you believe that? So that was the story of Alexander's disastrous attempt to invade India, which ended up costing him his life, most likely. Ayush says, is cricket, the game of cricket, also a colonial thing, a British thing? The modern day sport of cricket is something that emerged out of England. Yeah, the bat and ball thing. Yeah. But if you look at the story of the childhood of Shri Krishna, there is this episode in which he is playing a game on the banks of the Yamuna River. He's playing a game of bat and ball, and the ball falls into the river. And at that place in the river, there is this giant snake who lives there. And he refuses to give the ball back or whatever. And Lord Krishna goes down and defeats him, and then spares his life and comes back with the ball, right? So there is a story of Lord Krishna playing a game of bat and ball, which is why people say that the British accidentally rediscovered an ancient Indian game. So cricket has its origins most likely in India, but the British seem to have independently discovered that game about 300-400 years ago. Yeah. All right. Let's take some other questions. Gilli Danda. Yes, that's another game that's somewhat similar. It's a folk game, an ancient game in India. Ritvik says India pulled out of IPEF and RCEP. So how will it help with the geopolitics of India in the tense region, as geopolitics without geoeconomics is a fool's errand? So we don't know what was the deal. India has not pulled out of the entire Indo-Pacific economic thing, forum, federation, whatever it is. India has pulled out of one of the pillars, which is the trade pillar. So see, the IPEF is a US creation. And when you have a multilateral organization which has been created by one big power, and when you have a multilateral organization in which you have one major power, then this organization is going to further and promote the agenda of the biggest nation within its umbrella. So the IPEF, when it comes to trade, will further the US agenda. The Americans don't want India to rise too high. They don't want India to become the next China. They want India to remain a middle power. They don't want India to become a great power. And that's why I would say that the terms of the trade pillar of the IPEF would have been most likely something that are not very beneficial to India. And that's why India has most likely done the right thing and pulled out of the trade pillar. There was something else before it, the Asia Pacific, Indo-Pacific Economic Forum. I'm not sure what it was. There were other trade organizations as well in which India did not participate. So, India can do geoeconomics with a variety of partners. We would like to see a multipolar world. We will certainly trade with every nation that in a way that's beneficial for us. We don't have to do it under the terms that the Americans impose on India, right? So just because India has pulled out of the trade pillar of the IPEF doesn't mean that we are going to stop trading with everybody. No, we're going to keep trading with everybody, but we will do it on mutually beneficial terms, not on the terms dictated by the superpower. India will trade with France. India will trade with Japan. India will trade with Indonesia. India will trade with various European nations. India will trade with Africa. India will trade with the Middle East. India will trade with Russia. India will even trade with China to some extent and with the Central Asian nations. But we will do it on our terms in a way that's mutually beneficial. We will not do it as per the diktats of the superpower. So that is the deal. So it may actually help India to pull out of the trade pillar of the IPEF, because if you do that, then you're going to have to agree to certain terms and conditions which may not be beneficial to you, but which will further the agenda of the US. So overall, good. I don't know what the exact terms and conditions are. Maybe it's not been revealed, but I think it's a good move. All right, what else? Where else are we? Um, okay. Can a coup in Russia or China prompt the West to further disintegrate them into smaller entities? Is it feasible? Well, it all depends on the outcome of the coup. Does the coup make the nation stronger, or does the coup make the nation weaker? If you have a strong leader who is taking the nation in the right direction, and he is uh, ousted by a group of other people, and then the new political dispensation causes political and economic instability in the nation, then it's going to be beneficial for the West. But if the coup results in a stronger system, a more stable system, then it's going to benefit China or Russia. So if you have a coup, there are rumors of a coup going around right now, about a coup in China, possibly. I don't know. So if there is indeed a coup, and if that coup results in a stronger China, then it's going to be bad for the West. But if that coup is going to sow chaos in China and create instability, it will be a great opportunity for the US to possibly undermine China, possibly even disintegrate it. Similarly, for Russia, Mr. Putin is a strong man. He has absolute control over Russia. If there is a coup and a weaker leader comes to power, or a coalition of weaker leaders, that will be a dream come true for the US. But if there is a coup and somebody even stronger comes to power, it's going to be a nightmare for the US. So it depends on what happens, what sort of coup it is, and what is the outcome of the coup. Yeah. So in case the coup creates instability and chaos, it is certainly feasible for the West to take advantage of that and disintegrate the nation into smaller entities. Yeah, that's how it goes. Right. Where else? What else? Is it coup or is it coupe? The word COUP, coup, is a French word. So in French, you say coup, you don't say coupe. But yeah, if you were to go with the British pronunciation, it should be coupe. But many of these words in the English language, they come from the French language. And yeah, so that's why we say coup, coup, KOO, coup. Right. Um, okay. Any other question? Should India also disintegrate other nations? Well, there are two nations that need to be reconfigured in the long run. First of all, Pakistan needs to cease to exist as in the shape and form it is today. We need to ensure that Pakistan, the various regions of Pakistan, go their separate ways. Uh, the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa region and the Northwest Frontier Province. Shall we look at the map? Where's the map? Here's the map. So Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and all the in the Northwest Frontier Province, that should mostly go back into Afghanistan, because that's what the Pashtuns seek, and I think that is a valid, justifiable demand. Balochistan should be free, Sindh should be free, and the Pakistani portion of Punjab should also be independent for some time. And obviously, Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir, Gilgit Baltistan, all of that should come back into India. So yes, India should disintegrate Pakistan. I do not wish any harm to the people of Pakistan, who are our brothers and sisters. They are the same blood as us, same origin, same history, same ancestry. But we do need to reconfigure the map of Pakistan and ensure that Pakistan ceases to exist as a nation, because it is an artificial and temporary nation. I haven't said that today, right? Temporary nation. Here we go. So Pakistan is an artificial and temporary nation that was created by outside forces to harm India and to further those outside forces' geopolitical interests. It doesn't suit the interests of the people of the Indian subcontinent. That's why we need to reconfigure Pakistan, disintegrate it, yes, and ensure that the people of the region have a better life and a better future. Similarly, we need to, in the long run, ensure that Tibet becomes independent again. India does not seek to rule Tibet. Tibet should be an independent nation again. That is the only solution to the India China border dispute. China has no business being in Tibet. As long as China occupies Tibet, India and China will have very tense and very adversarial relations. That is unnatural. India and China have always been the best of friends for 2000 years, ever since India civilized China, right? So, in the long run, India needs to ensure that Tibet regains its independence, which would mean disintegrating China in the shape and form that it is today. So, that is the answer to your question. India needs to disintegrate Pakistan, and also India needs to free Tibet from China. It's not an easy task. It's not that's something that's going to happen next weekend or next year, but in the next 20 years, these things need to happen for India and the people of the subcontinent to have a better future, and also for the people of Tibet. The Chinese people can go their way. They have no business being in China. So, yes, that's what needs to happen. Shall we take one more question? Shall we take one more question? All right. Yeah, I don't even know what decoloniality is. Yeah, I haven't read those books these days, which are quite popular. Bobby says also creates a buffer, and Tibet was longing for independence since occupation. I could not agree more. Yes. So if you have a free Tibet, it will be great for the people of Tibet. They will finally be free from nearly a century of foreign occupation. It will be great for that. It will also create a buffer between India and China. So if India becomes too powerful, it will be a good thing for China that there's a huge landmass that separates China from India. Again, if Tibet is free and if China becomes very powerful, it's a good thing for India because there's a big landmass which is independent. It's a buffer between India and China. So it is good for both nations, for India as well as China. So, yes, that's what needs to happen, and that's what India needs to engineer. The Chinese will not allow that. The Chinese will not be in favor of that, but India needs to do that. China coup flights cancelled. Yes, I just showed it to you on the flight radar website. You can see that the flights, thousands of flights have been cancelled. Are you ritual? I'm I'm not sure what that means. Am I ritual? I'm a human being. I'm sure you meant something that I could not get it. I apologize, but yeah. Okay, Shaheen says, what do you think about India's three historical blunders as described by our Minister of External Affairs, Dr. S. Jaishankar? Is there any other blunder you want to add? What are the blunders? The three, he did say something. One was partition, one was um, keeping the West at arm's length, and third was, I'm not sure what it was, not the lack of economic growth, was it? I'm not sure. One of the, yeah, partition, obviously, the allowing the creation of Pakistan was indeed a blunder. It was indeed a blunder, yes. Um, Allowing someone like Mr. Nehru to be appointed and selected the prime minister was obviously a blunder, because that's why many of these things happened. Allowing the Chinese to take over Aksai Chin, and the government was sleeping about it for 5 years. They were not even aware of it. That's an incredible blunder. Incredible blunder. You know what happened? Here's what happened. You have this region over here. Uh, these days, Google is playing nice, but this region, Aksai Chin, this big region over here, is currently under illegal Chinese occupation. So what happened in the early 1950s is that the Chinese started constructing a road in this region, and they de facto annexed this entire enormous region. And the Indian government was not even aware of it. And when Mr. Nehru was told about it, he said, what's the problem? What's the big deal? Not even a blade of grass grows there. So, yeah, that's a major blunder. And what other blunders do we have? Not allowing the Air Force to take part in the 1962 war. If the Air Force had participated in the 1962 war, the result could have been different, or maybe not, but at least it would have been a better result for India. Yeah. So Mr. Nehru did not allow the Air Force to operate in the 1962 war, which is incredibly strange. I mean, who was he supporting, India or China? Makes one wonder. Obviously, he's a magnificent person and a great person, but yes, we are smaller people, so we should still think about it, right? And so on. And allowing Pakistan to take over POK, Gilgit Baltistan. not allowing the Indian army to recapture POK and Gilgit Baltistan. That is an incredible blunder. Mr. Nehru said, no, we will not go further. The army should stop and we will go to the UN. Why? Anyway, there are so many such blunders, but just a few of them I can speak about right now. Okay, I'll take one more question. One more question. What do we have? Are we trying to decipher the IVC script, the Indus Valley Civilization script, or are we still waiting for Westerners? I think we have reached the stage where individuals can use scientific techniques to decipher the script. There is a person called Yajna Devam. That's the online handle. He or she seems to have deciphered the script. I keep saying that I'm going to study it. I still don't have the time, but it looks like a decipherment has been done. It looks like it is Vedic Sanskrit. Anyway, that needs to be obviously corroborated independently. But yeah, we have individuals within India, not in the academic system, which is hopeless, but we have individuals, independent people who are trying to decipher it, and there seems to be extremely good progress happening in that direction. So let's not wait for anybody. We should do it ourselves. Tell us about Mahapadmananda, one of the most powerful kings, founder of the Nanda dynasty. So Mahapadmananda was, I don't know what his ancestry was. Either he was the son of the last king of the previous dynasty, or he was the son of a barber or whatever. But he was able to establish his own dynasty, the Nanda dynasty. He became very powerful in a very short period of time. He was a very unpopular king. He had very unpopular policies. He used to levy very oppressive taxes on the people, and he was a very, very ruthless collector of taxes. He enriched himself at the expense of the empire and the people. A king or an emperor, when they levy taxes, those taxes need to be reinvested in infrastructure and in ensuring the prosperity of the nation and the people. It is, the tax is supposed to serve the nation. In the case of Mahapadmananda, he amassed it to enrich himself, so the nation was suffering, the people were unhappy, but he was very powerful. He had a very powerful army, and in a very short period of time he was able to consolidate his power on very, very large parts of India. It is yeah, and then he had a number of successors who were all weaker and weaker, and eventually we know that the dynasty was supplanted by the Mauryan dynasty, of whom Chandragupta Maurya was the first emperor. Anyhow, that's the answer, and yeah, that's it for tonight. Thank you very much, everybody, for all the questions. Very interesting times we are living in. May you live in interesting times. That's what they say as a curse. But anyhow, that's where we are. So thank you for the questions. Very interesting session as always. And I will see you in tomorrow's session, which will be mainly about geopolitics and history and current affairs. I will see you then in 24 or so hours. Until then, take care. Good night, good day. I'll see you soon. Bye.